Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to plunge into the sources behind compelling stories, pulling out the key insights so you, our listener, get more than just the headlines. You get the context, surprising details, and hopefully a much deeper understanding. Today, we're tackling a story that has quite literally carved a scar through a major American city. Imagine this: you're driving down a wide 6-lane highway, but it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere specific. It just sort of stops. And then maybe you realize as you're driving that this concrete ribbon is paved directly over places where people used to live, work, raise families. Rochelle Atkins, who grew up there, put it so powerfully: if you drive there, you're driving through my backyard. That really hits home, doesn't it? We're doing a deep dive today into Baltimore's infamous Highway to Nowhere. And look, this isn't just about a failed infrastructure project. It's really a story about a deep wound in West Baltimore, about promises broken, about community resilience, and yeah, about the ongoing struggle to heal. Our mission here is to really unpack this whole thing. How did it even start? What was the human cost? And believe me, it was immense. What are the lasting effects? And, maybe surprisingly, how did part of it get stopped? And what are people feeling now about efforts to fix it? Because that human cost, we need to grasp it right away. We're talking about nearly 1,000 homes demolished. Think about that number, 1,000. And that meant 1,500 residents forced out of their homes, mostly Black families. Just let that sink in. All right, so let's unpack this. How does a highway, something supposedly about progress, end up with a name like Highway to Nowhere? That name itself tells a story, right? What's the origin there?
It really does. That name, Highway to Nowhere, it's not just catchy. It's basically an indictment, isn't it? It speaks volumes about an unfulfilled promise, a failed vision. And to get it, you really have to go back to that whole urban renewal era, mostly the 60s and 70s. There was this huge push across the U.S. for these massive federal highway projects. The thinking was, connect the suburbs to downtown, make driving easier, boost the economy. Highways were seen as symbols of modernity, of progress.
Right, the car was king, and cities needed to adapt.
Exactly. But the problem, and this is what the sources make devastatingly clear, is that these grand plans often steamrolled right over existing communities. And crucially, they disproportionately impacted Black and lower-income neighborhoods. So the Highway to Nowhere name captures that perfectly. A project started with big ideas, big federal dollars, but what it left behind in West Baltimore was division, decay, and deep, deep community trauma. A broken promise set in concrete.
A broken promise. And for the people living there, it wasn't abstract at all. Let's get into the specifics of what happened, because this idea of progress came at such a devastating human price. What was the original plan supposed to be?
Well, the original vision was pretty grand, actually. It was meant to be a major artery, I-70N, a 6-lane highway cutting west from downtown Baltimore, aiming to connect eventually to the main Interstate 70. It was just one piece of a much larger, quite complex plan for a whole network of expressways crisscrossing the city, linking up I-95, I-83, and I-70. On paper, it looked efficient. It was sold as easing traffic, helping commerce, connecting the city.
The typical arguments for these big projects then? Convenience, economic growth.
Precisely. But the sources just hammer home this stark contrast between that top-down vision and the reality on the ground for the people whose lives were fundamentally altered. The human cost wasn't just an unfortunate side effect. It feels like it was almost treated as irrelevant by the planners.
And the tool they used to make this happen was eminent domain, right? Can you unpack that a bit? How did that work here?
Yes, eminent domain was absolutely central. It's the government's power to take private property for public use, even if the owner doesn't want to sell. The catch is they're supposed to provide just compensation.
Supposed to.
Exactly. Supposed to. Because what happened in Baltimore and in many similar cases across the country shows that just compensation was often, well, anything but just. The numbers we mentioned, nearly 1,000 homes, 1,500 people displaced by the early 70s, are just brutal, and it bears repeating. The sources are clear that this disproportionately hit Black families, Black neighborhoods, so eminent domain, this legal tool, effectively became a weapon for dismantling established, thriving Black communities.
Yeah.
Systemic inequity in action.
And they weren't just offered a price. Sometimes they were pressured, even threatened.
Oh, absolutely. The sources give examples. Catherine Pearson talks about her father. He was a widower, raising 8 kids on his own. Imagine that. And she says he was explicitly threatened with eminent domain if he didn't agree to sell their family home.
That's not a negotiation. That's basically coercion.
It's coercion, pure and simple, using the weight of the state to force people out of their homes.
And the personal stories behind those numbers, they're just heartbreaking. You mentioned Rochelle Atkins. She was 78 when interviewed for one source, and she remembers her childhood home, 1916 West Mulberry Street. gone now,
Hmm.
under the highway. Her grandmother, a widow in her 70s, held out. Rochelle said she resisted selling until almost the entire block was empty in 1968. Can you imagine the pressure? Watching your neighbors leave, your world disappearing around you?
It's almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
And then, when her grandmother finally did sell, the money she got, Rochelle's words were nowhere near enough to buy another house.
So they get displaced, and they don't even get enough money to find equivalent housing elsewhere.
Exactly. The market was likely appreciating, and the compensation just didn't keep pace. Rochelle described the rental they ended up in Park Heights, as miserable. She said it literally leaned to the left like it had foundation problems.
Oh.
But it wasn't just the physical house. She talked about missing her friends, missing that daily life, that community support system. It's that displacement from the social fabric that cuts so deep, you know?
Yeah, losing your home is one thing. Losing your entire community, that's another level of loss.
It is. Though interestingly, she did mention sometimes running into old friends decades later, which speaks to how strong those bonds were, even after being forcibly broken. A bittersweet note, I suppose.
And hers isn't an isolated story, is it? Glenn Smith's experience seems particularly cruel.
It really does highlight the sort of arbitrary nature of it all. His family was forced out of their home on Loretta Avenue in 1969, but the highway never even got built that far west.
So they lost their home for nothing, for a road that never came.
Pretty much. They went through all the trauma, the upheaval, the loss, for a section of highway that remained just a plan on paper in their area. It really makes you question the whole justification, the progress narrative. What possible progress justifies that?
And Ada Wells, on Pulaski Street, she had a striking description too.
She did. She called her neighborhood one of the best looking before the demolitions began and afterwards. She described it as becoming a haunted village. That image is so powerful. Empty lots, boarded up houses where vibrant life used to be.
The haunted village, that really captures the sense of loss, the emptiness left behind.
And she and her husband fought back, which is notable. They actually managed to argue for replacement value for their home, not just the depressed market value the city was offering, a value the city itself had helped depress.
How did the city depress the value?
That's a crucial point we need to get into. But Ada Wells's fight shows the injustice baked into the compensation system. Even though they eventually moved away, their small victory highlights the struggle for basic fairness.
So it wasn't just houses being torn down. It was, as you said, the whole social fabric. Glenn Smith called it a tight neighborhood.
Yes, and Catherine Pearson really painted a picture of that life. Kids playing outside skating, dodgeball, jumping rope, people sitting on their porches in the summer, even sleeping outside on gliders because there was no air conditioning.
And that detail about leaving doors open.
Incredible, isn't it? We'd leave our doors open, she said. We had no fear. Think about that level of trust, that sense of safety and community cohesion, completely shattered.
It's hard to even imagine that level of trust today in many places.
And that's the point. The highway didn't just take buildings, it took away that way of life, that sense of belonging. Catherine Pearson said, "We got displaced from the friends we grew up with. Looking back, it really crushed us."
Crushed us. That's a strong word. It speaks to deep, lasting emotional damage.
Absolutely. It was trauma.
Yeah.
And when you look at it systemically, these infrastructure projects during that era consistently hit vulnerable communities the hardest. Eminent domain might be legal, but its application here was devastatingly unjust. It wasn't just a few bad decisions, it was baked into the planning process, often ignoring or actively sacrificing these communities for a vision of progress that benefited others.
And the damage didn't stop when the construction crews left, did it? The sources talk about long-term disinvestment, about decay setting in.
No, the initial displacement was just the beginning of a long cycle of decline for the surrounding areas. The description in the sources is stark. Neighborhoods today pocked with tired or vacant row houses, some just shells with trees growing through them, and weedy, neglected open lots.
A far cry from the vibrant community Catherine Pearson described.
A world away. And this decline isn't accidental. It's directly linked to the highway project, acting as a catalyst for disinvestment. Glenn Smith calls it a creation of poverty. The highway didn't just cut through the neighborhood. It fundamentally destabilized it, economically and socially.
And the city government actually played a role in accelerating that decay. You mentioned that earlier.
Yes, this is a really critical and frankly quite disturbing detail. James Dilts, writing in the Baltimore Sun back in 1968, observed something crucial. Once the neighborhood was targeted for highway demolition, The city would not issue repair permits.
Wait, so homeowners couldn't even get permits to fix up their own houses?
Exactly. The city actively prevented them from maintaining or improving their properties. Think about the effect of that. Dilts Road, the homeowners were left with slum streets and declining property values.
So the city essentially ensured the neighborhood would look blighted?
It certainly looks that way. It created a self-fulfilling prophecy. The area declines because repairs aren't allowed, making it look like clearance is justified, while simultaneously driving down the property values, which then makes acquisition cheaper for the city.
That feels incredibly cynical, deliberately letting an area decay to make way for a highway.
It's a harsh assessment, but the evidence points that way, and it directly ties into the unfair compensation issue.
Right, because they were offered prices based on that depressed value.
Based on the fallen value, Dilts wrote, which the city caused in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a vicious cycle. Your property value is artificially lowered by city policy, and then the city uses that low value to justify paying you less when they force you out.
And on top of that, the racial dimension made it even harder for Black families.
Absolutely critical. The compensation they received, already inadequate, simply couldn't buy a comparable house elsewhere. Houses were more expensive, and crucially, as the source notes, being Black, their choices were limited, due to segregation and redlining practices that were still very much in effect.
So less money, fewer options, higher prices, a triple whammy.
Precisely. It wasn't just losing a home. It was being financially penalized and then trapped by systemic racism in the housing market. It compounded the economic hardship and severely limited opportunities for families to rebuild their lives and wealth.
This really underscores the long-term trauma. You mentioned Rochelle Atkins believed her family would still be there if not for the highway, that lost sense of rootedness.
It's profound. That feeling of what might have been, the loss of generational connection to a place. And from a broader perspective, this is a textbook example of how urban blight isn't some natural process. It's often actively created by policy decisions, by infrastructure projects like this one, and it doesn't just harm the people forced out. It perpetuates cycles of poverty and limited opportunity for the entire community left behind, living in the shadow of the highway, dealing with the fragmentation, the lack of investment. It forces us to ask, what is the true long-term cost of this kind of progress? It seems infinitely higher than any claimed benefit.
Okay, so you have this massive project, federal backing, this seemingly unstoppable force tearing through neighborhoods. It sounds bleak, but then something changed. The highway didn't get fully built out as planned. What happened?
Well, this is where the story takes a really fascinating and frankly inspiring turn. It's a genuine David and Goliath situation. What stopped the highway from carving even deeper into West Baltimore and other parts of the city was quite simply citizen activism.
People power, basically.
Exactly. Organized, determined, and surprisingly diverse people power. It wasn't just one group. It was what James Dilts called a strange coalition that came together.
Who was in this coalition?
You had, of course, the West Baltimore homeowners fighting for their homes and their community's survival. But they were joined by environmentalists who were deeply concerned about the highway's proposed route cutting through Leakin Park, a major green space.
Okay, so homeowners and environmentalists.
And then you also had urban preservationists joining the fight. They were focused on protecting historic neighborhoods like Federal Hill and Fells Point from other parts of this massive interconnected highway plan that threatened different areas of the city.
So it wasn't just about this one stretch of road. It was a bigger battle against a whole citywide highway network plan.
Precisely. They were fighting against this enormous, constantly shifting plan to thread expressways connecting I-95, I-83, and I-70 right through established, historic, and residential areas all over Baltimore, recognizing that shared threat was key to building the coalition.
And this fight had real political consequences too, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually famous for helping launch the political career of Barbara Mikulski, who later became a long-serving and very influential U.S. senator. It shows how local grassroots activism can have ripples all the way up to the national level.
Facing down the road lobby, as one activist called it, must have felt impossible, though.
It did. Stuart Wexler, who was involved with the Congress of Racial Equality, QR back then, talked about that feeling. He said the road lobby had this aura of invincibility. Everyone just assumed the highways would get built no matter what.
But they proved that wrong.
They absolutely did. Wexler called their victory a template of what could be done and should be done. A real David and Goliath moment. It showed that communities could organize, could build alliances, and could successfully challenge these massive, seemingly inevitable projects. It became a model for resistance.
That is genuinely inspiring. It shows the power of organizing, of different groups finding common cause.
It really does. Environmentalists, preservationists, homeowners, they might have had different primary motivations, but they united against a common threat and managed to shift the narrative, shift the political calculus. It's a powerful lesson in coalition building.
But even with that victory, there's a bittersweet element, isn't there?
There is. Stuart Wexler himself, despite celebrating the success and stopping further destruction, acknowledges the profound tragedy of what was built. He calls the highway to nowhere itself a tragedy.
Right, because saving other neighborhoods didn't undo the damage already done in West Baltimore.
Exactly. The victory prevented more scars, but it couldn't heal the original wound. That scar, the highway to nowhere, remains a stark physical reminder of the community that was destroyed.
Which brings us to today. Decades later, there are new efforts, new money aimed at trying to repair some of that damage. But it's complicated, right?
Very complicated. There's definitely a new development, a potential turning point. Baltimore recently received a significant chunk of federal money, $85.5 million from the Reconnecting Communities program.
Reconnecting communities. The name itself suggests the goal.
It does, and the money is earmarked for tangible things. Tearing down some of the imposing entrance and exit ramps over Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, even capping a block-long section of the highway itself, basically putting a lid on it to create new land, public spaces, maybe reconnect the street grid. The aim is to literally try and stitch the neighborhoods back together, physically.
That sounds promising, at least on the surface. $85 million isn't insignificant.
It's not. It represents a level of federal acknowledgement and investment that hasn't been seen before for this specific issue. But, and this is a huge but, there's a massive amount of skepticism among the people who live there, or who used to live there.
Skepticism born from past experiences, I imagine.
Absolutely. It's not just abstract negativity. It's rooted in lived history. As the sources say, these communities have heard previous lofty improvement plans that sought community buy-in but never came to pass.
Like the Red Line Project.
The Red Line is the perfect, painful example. It was a planned light rail line, years in the making, huge community involvement. It promised jobs, better transit, economic development right through these areas. And then in 2015, Governor Hogan just killed it, pulled the plug.
After all that planning and community hope. Devastating.
Utterly devastating, and it left this deep residue of mistrust. So when new plans come along, even with federal backing, the reaction isn't necessarily immediate enthusiasm. It's often, okay, we've heard this before, show us.
Glenn Smith summed it up pretty bluntly, didn't he? Promises made, promises not kept.
Exactly, and he also said, people are getting tired of going to meetings. Think about that, the sheer exhaustion of participating, sharing your history, your hopes, again and again, only to see plans fall through.
His question really cuts deep. Where do you put your trust when you've been constantly misled and have reaped no benefits from any of these projects?
It's the core question, isn't it? How do you rebuild trust when it's been broken so systematically over such a long period? That's maybe even harder than rebuilding the physical infrastructure.
Yet, despite that wariness, Glenn Smith is still involved, still organizing.
He is, which is remarkable. He's leading groups like the Reconnecting Communities in West Baltimore Coalition, bringing together different neighborhood associations, Harlem Park, Lafayette Square, Poppleton, Rosemont, to advocate for residents, to make sure their voices are heard this time.
That shows incredible resilience.
It really does.
Yeah.
A commitment to fighting for their community's future, even with all the reasons they have to be cynical. And, adding another layer, the current governor, Wes Moore, have revived the Red Line proposal. So there's that cautious hope again. Maybe this time it'll be different. But the caution is strong.
It's this constant tension between hope and history. And while there's hope for the future, there's also this acknowledgement that the past can't be fully undone. Catherine Pearson's assessment was quite stark.
Yes, she said, too late for us. They can't restore what was. It's that painful recognition that the community she knew, the life they had, is gone forever. No amount of new construction can bring that back.
Acknowledging the irreparable loss.
Exactly. But then you have Rochelle Atkins, who, despite everything, says, I love Baltimore. I would never live anywhere else. It's still my home, and it's a great home. Her focus isn't on recreating the past, but on building a better future now.
What does that future look like for her?
She put it very practically. Make it a good community, give people jobs, give people a desire to want to live in the area and be proud of where they are. It's about present-day dignity, opportunity, and community pride.
That really speaks to the challenge of restorative justice in places like this, doesn't it? It's not just about fixing the physical damage.
Not at all.
It's incredibly complex. You're dealing with historical trauma, ongoing economic challenges, deep mistrust, and trying to build a shared vision for the future. What does repair even mean? Is it economic? Is it psychological healing? Is it social cohesion? It's likely all of the above, and different people will prioritize different aspects. And that raises the big question, can this money, this $85 million, actually heal these deep wounds? Or is it just a down payment? A first step that needs to be followed by sustained commitment, genuine power sharing with the community, and a real effort to rebuild that shattered trust. The money is necessary, clearly, but it's almost certainly not sufficient on its own.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We traced the origins of the highway to nowhere, the scar left by mid-century urban renewal. We heard the devastating personal stories of displacement and the loss of a thriving Black community. We looked at the long shadow it cast, the disinvestment, the decay, the cycle of broken promises. But we also saw the incredible power of citizen activism that managed to stop further destruction, a real David and Goliath story. And now we see these current efforts to reconnect, to repair, met with both hope and deep, historically justified skepticism. Why does the story matter to you listening now? Well, it's more than just Baltimore's history. It's a really stark lesson in how big planning decisions, often made far away from the people affected, can shape lives for generations. It shows the importance of community voice, the power of resistance, and it forces us to confront this ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
How do we address historical injustices? How do we repair harm in a way that's truly meaningful, especially when trust has been so profoundly broken? So here's a final thought to leave you with, something building on everything we've discussed. Given that deep skepticism, given those losses that can never truly be recovered, what does genuine reconnection actually look like for West Baltimore? Is it mostly about the physical changes, capping the highway, new parks, better streets? Is it primarily about bringing in jobs and economic opportunity? Or is the heart of it something deeper? Is it about the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust between the community and the institutions that failed them? Is it about fostering a shared sense of future, a renewed sense of belonging that no amount of federal funding alone can guarantee? What does it take to truly heal a wound like the highway to nowhere? That's something worth pondering.